So, 5 things you need to know about AI. First am I. My name is Will Douglas Heaven, and this is my official South by Southwest London profile picture. And the lesson here for everybody is that if you don't send in the picture you actually want them to use in time, the organizers will quite understandably take what you once put on LinkedIn in a moment of nihilism. Anyway, I'm the senior editor for AI at MIT Technology Review. I've been a tech journalist for 13 years, and before that, I was a computer scientist. So that's an implicit plea to, believe everything I say. So what is Tech Review? We're a magazine. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're owned by MIT, but fully editorially independent, which means we can write about what we want, say what we want. And here are a few covers of our print magazine. And of course, a lot of what we write about is AI. We write about AI in education, which is having a massive impact at the moment. Are robots really coming to the home? We've been hearing this for decades now, but there's a revolution going on in robotics that might be worth paying attention to. And this is our 125th anniversary issue, and we've been going for a long time. We also have a website, technologyreview.com, so do check that out. This is where our daily journalism goes. And we cover a lot more than just AI. We biotech and health and tech policy, and climate tech and energy. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, then check us out. Anyway, that's by way of introduction. But I wanted to start, I thought it'd be fun to start with a pop quiz. So what we're going to do, we're going to listen to 4 tracks, like 30-second clips, thereabouts, of 4 different songs. And I want to ask you, do you think this was generated by an AI or by people? All right? And we'll see how this goes. Right, so number 1. I thought there'd be some more moshing, but I've already had the tech crew complain this morning about, are you the guy with the slides with the awful metal in it? We've had to play that all morning. Anyway, so number 1, was that generated by, let's do it with a show of hands, was it generated by people? Was it generated by AI? Okay, AI wins for metal. Number 2. Okay, same again. Hands for people. I love there's still some people who have faith in humanity in the audience. Hands for AI. Okay, I promised you, not all of these are AI, so this is not a trick. Okay, number 3, instrumental rock. Is instrumental a clue or a red herring? Okay, hands for people. Hands for AI. I think a lot of people abstain there. That one's the least certain of the lot. Okay, last one. quite like that one. All right, okay, last one. I can already tell that some interaction fatigue is setting in, but hands for people, hands for AI. Okay, so I mean, most of you probably can't see what's going on behind you. There's an overwhelming AI vote for 1, 2, and 4, and not too sure about 3. So let me put you out of your misery. 1, 2, and 4 are all generated by AI. Not just the music, like the lyrics and the vocals, everything there was generated by generative models. My colleague in Boston, James O'Donnell, used a tool called Udio to generate these. And you interact with it, and some people are nodding, you know this, it's completely changing how people are sort of generating music. But you interact with it in the way that you would a chatbot. You know, to ask it to generate a story or an image, you can just prompt it. And it took him about between 2 and 10 prompts to generate all of those, tweaking in different ways. So for me, the interesting thing here, and I kind of thought this is maybe the way the voting would go. The one that most of you, or the people that were least sure about, most of you thought was by people, was actually, the one that most of you were most certain was by people was number 3. And I think it's because 1, 2, and 4 are actually the better tracks. Anyway, all of that is basically to lead us up to number 1. Generative AI is now so good that it's getting scary. And maybe that's an obvious thing to say. But I am constantly finding that I need to check my assumptions about how fast this technology is progressing. And it's my job to try and keep on top of it. When James shared that music quiz around the newsroom a few weeks ago, it was a slightly longer quiz. I think there were 10 tracks in it. But nobody came close to getting it right. And it's not just audio, of course. We are seeing massive advances in a range of technologies. And I just want to show you, some more examples of this, just to hammer this point home. I'm going to show you some very, very short clips of video. And I'm using as an example VO3, which is the latest video generation model from Google DeepMind. And only because it's the latest one out. They put it out a few weeks ago, and it's currently the best. But you can expect there'll be another company along soon with an even better model. So, number 1. It's got like the ASMR typing on this really gets me. Number 2. I mean, just look at that water. And number 3, this is my favorite. This is onions sizzling in a pan. Nothing more than that. But there is nothing about this video, I think, that would tell you that that wasn't real footage. And then the last one.
It's a force, a wild, untamed might. And she commands your awe with every breaking light.
So models can now generate voiceovers and sort of sync them with the AI-generated actors. And of course, it's not just about generating videos and music. This is having massive impact in the world, across industry. So software development is one of the areas I think is most advanced in this sphere. So I haven't spoken to a software engineer, and there's probably a lot of them in this room, who hasn't used AI or doesn't make a habit already of using AI tools to help them code. You've probably heard of vibe coding, which essentially means if you have no coding skills at all, you can still generate little homebrew apps by sort of asking the chatbot to generate the code for you. It's sort of the programming equivalent of home cooking. And the top end of industry, too, this is having a massive impact. Both the CEOs of Microsoft and Google have said recently that around 25% of all software generated inside their companies, I mean, just think how much that is now generated by AI. And it's just a placeholder for like all of science. I mean, here's a protein. Protein synthesis is massive, really important for drug development. But what's happening with proteins is happening with all other molecules in chemistry and material science. So we're going to see enormous things happening there. And here is the CEO of Google himself, Sundar Pichai, standing on stage at their recent Google AI I/O event, which is sort of their showcase of all things new and cool at Google, talking about how generative AI is changing robotics for them. But it's not just that. I mean, Google is putting generative AI into everything that it touches, from phones to email to search. And as it becomes ubiquitous, it's sort of becoming a little bit more normal, a little bit more invisible. And maybe that's not a good thing. So final example from this first section. Some of you may have seen this. It sort of went viral a couple of weeks ago. But Some US newspapers published an insert. There was sort of, summer recommendations insert that was full of, cool things to do that summer. And one of the pages was, here's a reading list, books you should read. But it didn't take people long to point out that a bunch of these were completely made up. So here's just two. Isabel Allende, real author, Tidewater Dreams is not a book she's ever written. And yet, this is why you should read it. The beloved Chilean-American author returns with a multi-generational saga set in a coastal town where magical realism meets environmental activism. I mean, I think she should write that. And my favorite one, by Andy Weir, The Last Algorithm. Following his success with The Martian, Weir delivers another science-driven thriller. This time, the story follows a programmer who discovers that an AI system has developed consciousness and has been secretly influencing global events for years. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to say you can't make this stuff up, but of course you can. Which brings me to number 2. Hallucination is a feature, not a bug. So hallucination is what we call it when a generative model makes something up that, is not true or doesn't match reality in some ways, is a fiction. And we've seen a lot of high-profile examples of this over the last year or so. There was an airline that was forced to honor sort of a refund that the customer chatbot had given to some of its customers, even though that refund didn't actually exist in the terms and conditions. Lawyers have got in serious trouble and ruined their careers by submitting trial briefs to judges that include case law that is completely made up. And one of the most recent examples, RFK Jr. in the US government, his Department of Health recently put out a really big report that was found to include cited scientific articles which don't exist. And so no one in that team has actually sort of owned up that they've used a chatbot, but that's certainly a telltale sign. So why is this a problem? The way that people talk about hallucination usually is that this is something that tech isn't quite there yet, but we can fix it. But the better way to think about it is that this is actually what these models are trained to do. It's not a flaw that we're going to fix. This is what they're meant to do. Make stuff up is what they do all the time. So the remarkable thing is not so much that they generate nonsense, it's that the nonsense that they generate all of the time is actually right most of the time, or at least matches reality most of the time. But the idea that we're going to go in and sort of fix it, I think, is wrong-headed because this is what the models do. So let's have a look at what that means. So this here is a technical diagram of a large language model. At the front here, this little smiley face, that's ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, whatever flavor of chatbot you like to use. But behind it, that's the Shoggoth, the Lovecraftian large language model that actually powers this technology. And this is a thing that we've trained on everything on the internet that isn't nailed down, basically. And what you do when you train a large language model is basically train it to reproduce things that look like the text that it's found on the internet. So it reproduces, Reddit posts and receipts and Amazon listings and fan fiction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that itself is not very useful. So what you then need to do is train it a little bit more. Put a human mask on that monster. And that training is basically make it do things like, answer questions, have a dialogue, help me edit my CV, give me some things to talk about on stage at South by Southwest. And then the final cherry on top, this bit over here is, how to make that chatbot as charming as possible, inoffensive, something that we keep coming back to all the time. And that's a little bit that's sort of done, that training is called reinforcement learning with human feedback. Essentially, lots of people sit around and give thumbs up and thumbs down to the output of large language models until they give responses more like we want and more like we don't. But my point here is that the engine of these things is still just making stuff up. A lot of the work done to sort of address hallucination is at this level. So at the best, it's like a sticky plaster over what the model actually does. And why does any of that matter? I think it's important because it manages our expectations of what this technology is, what it can and can't do, what it should and shouldn't be used for. So another way of thinking of the large language model is a slot machine. If you were to peel open a model and look inside, it would have billions and billions of numbers. Those numbers are used to calculate its response each time. When you interact with the chatbot, you crank the handle, and out comes an answer. Interact again, crank the handle, and comes an answer. So don't be surprised that it makes stuff up, because that's what they're meant to do. Number 3, AI is power hungry and getting hungrier. So you've probably heard that AI is power hungry, and that reputation comes from the energy costs to train these models. You run hundreds, if not thousands, of really powerful computers round the clock for months at a time. But that takes a lot of energy, but you train them once and then you move on. What's changing now is that millions of people are using these models. And though each use is tiny, when you have that many people doing it, the costs ramp up. And some of my colleagues recently worked months on a big package to the most in-depth analysis of this I think we've yet seen. So do go and check that out. Just as an indication, ChatGPT now has 400 million weekly users. That makes it the 5th most visited website in the world after Instagram and just before X. So it's no wonder that tech companies are racing to build data centers in the desert and revamp power grids everywhere. So a data center, of course, is just a warehouse you stuff full with the most expensive computers you can get, run them around the clock. When you interact with ChatGPT, this is where the computation happens. But the companies are not sharing information about how much electricity their models use. Of course not. Why would they? So what my colleagues did was teamed up with a bunch of researchers who were looking at open source models to try and estimate what the equivalent in the open source world was using. And they found a lot of stuff, but just a couple of highlights. If you were to interact with a chatbot and you ask it to generate a recipe, that's not going to use very much energy. Maybe like equivalent running a microwave for a couple of seconds. So, if you've got a habit of doing that, don't worry, it's not going to change your carbon footprint very much. But video generation, like we saw earlier, is completely different. That takes thousands of times more electricity to generate a video. And as these models get released and become popular, they're being used a lot. That video model now is all over TikTok and the internet. And it's not just the energy that you need to run the computers. As the computers get more powerful, they run hotter. You need cooling systems to cool them down. I love this photo. This is the roof of a Google data center, which is just all fans. And some people I've spoken to have said that the amount of electricity required to cool the computers is approaching the amount of electricity needed to run the computers in the first place. So the upshot is that after running all the numbers, this team of researchers and my colleagues found that maybe at the rate we're going in 3 years' time, then generative AI will use equivalent of the amount of energy it takes to run 22% of US homes in a year, which is massive. Number 4, nobody knows exactly how large language models work. So sure, we know how to build them, we know how to make them work really well, as we've seen, but exactly how they do what they do remains a mystery. It's like as if these weird things have been dropped from outer space and scientists are now circling them, poking them, and trying to figure out what they do. And that's important because, if we don't know exactly how they work, we can't fully control them. We don't know how good they are at this or that. We don't know, what's really going on with hallucinations. And one of my favorite teams working on this is a group of researchers at Anthropic, an AI company. And what they've done is built something like a microscope to look inside their large language model called Claude. And last year, they showed that they could identify tiny little pieces of the model that lit up when they showed Claude different inputs. Think of putting a model into the equivalent of an MRI. And so they found little pieces of the model that corresponded with things in the real world, like famous people, like Michael Jordan, everyday objects like chairs and potatoes, and vaguer concepts like disobedience or marital strife. They also found a piece of the model that corresponded to the Golden Gate Bridge. And when they showed it text with the Golden Gate Bridge in it, or showed it photos with the Golden Gate Bridge, or even the Bay Area, this area would light up. And they found that you could dial up that Golden Gate Bridge bit of the model so that Claude became obsessed with the bridge. It slipped mentions of the bridge into every response it gave. And when they quizzed Claude about what Claude thought it was, it insisted they were talking to the bridge itself. So I love this. What they've done now is they've found a way to connect those dots. So now when they look inside a model, they can see, you give it input and you get output. They can trace the path of what component connected to another component to get there. Now, it's important to stress that this is This is really, really early work. They're seeing a fraction of what the model does. And even then, the image is sort of distorted. But that's enough to give a sense, like a really surprising sense of what's actually going on. So I'll give you two quick examples. One example, they asked Claude to complete a rhyming couplet. I think the first couplet was something like, he saw a carrot and tried to grab it. Now, if you know anything about large language models, it's probably that they're supercharged autocomplete systems, right? So they predict the next word, one word at a time. That one trick is enough to get them to do pretty much everything that they do. But what they found when it generated the second line of this couplet, which was, I'm going to forget it now, but he saw a rabbit and tried to grab it. The second line was, his hunger was like a starving rabbit. Rather than generating that one word at a time, it already hit upon the rhyming word rabbit before it started. It had a sort of placeholder, I'm going to aim for rabbit, and then it generated the sentence to reach that. And I can tell by a look on a lot of your faces, like, why the hell do I need to care about that? That's the most nerdy, tiny detail I've heard all day. But the point is, these are the people making this technology, and they did not understand that basic functional thing about how it worked until they looked a couple of months ago. One more example. They asked it to do some simple maths. So, answer in one word, what is 36 plus 59? 95. OK, how do you get that? And Claude says, I added the ones, carried the one, then added the tens, resulting in 95. That's a textbook answer. That's a kind of, if you looked up on the internet, how to do this is what you get. It's what kids are taught every day. But when they looked inside the model, this is what Claude was doing. I don't even know really how to begin explaining this, but so each one of these sort of boxes is like the bits of the model that lights up, and then the lines are sort of connections between them. But it starts off doing weird approximations, like 30-ish, and add 57-ish, 40-ish plus 50-ish, and somehow it gets at the end, it says, approximately 92. And at the same time, at the bottom, it starts off doing more approximations, and then it sort of fixates on something which is actually quite sensible. It knows that for numbers ending in 6 and 9, the answer must end in 5, which is right. But, so then if you have roughly 92 and it must end in 5, you put that together and you get 95. So it's right, but that's not sort of how you or I would do it. But the kicker is that at the end, when they asked Claude to remember how it did that, it gave them the textbook answer. So the takeaway here is large language models are far weirder than anyone thought. And number two, when you ask them what they're doing, they're bullshitting. Number 5, and the last one, AGI does not mean anything. So AGI is a buzzword that's on a lot of people's lips at the moment. Like, the best approximation I can sort of give for what it really means is an AI system that can carry out a wide range of cognitive tasks as well as, if not better, than humans. But already, if you start picking that sentence, what on earth does that mean? Like, how wide a range is a wide range? What type of humans? What cognitive tasks? How do we measure that performance? And even the phrase carry out a cognitive task is itself a sort of byword for intelligence. So there's sort of circularity in that definition to begin with. And essentially what I think people mean when they talk about AGI is AI, but better. And there's a sense of inevitability in the tech world that because technology has improved in the past, that it's going to continue improving in the same way in future. Not just in the same way, like exponentially, you see graphs getting better and better and better. But there's actually zero evidence in practice that that's going to happen. Generative AI has got really, really good recently, but there's already signs that maybe it's tailing off. And there are bitter disputes among scientists whether generative AI is the be-all and end-all, or whether we need something else entirely. But we don't even know what that other thing is at all. And for these reasons, it used to be the case that AGI was kind of like a fringe concern. Mainstream people were embarrassed to even talk about it. And the term was invented in 2007 by a guy called Shane Legg. And at the time, Shane was just out of a failed AI startup. This was the end of the dot-com era. But don't worry about Shane, because Shane went on to co-found DeepMind. So he's doing OK. Anyway, Shane was talking to a friend of his who was writing a book of essays about future AI. And he wanted a title for the book that would somehow get across the idea that, I'm talking about AI that's better than what we have today. And back in the mid-2000s, of course, AI was machine learning, like sort of, the early Amazon recommender systems and things like that. So Shane suggested, let's call it AGI, AI but more general. And AGI has a ring to it, and it stuck. But if you ask Shane about this, he's very clear that AGI was never meant to be the name of a thing. Look, here, I've just made it. It's a goal, a research direction that we're aiming towards, rather than the end in itself. But I think as AI has got better and better, and especially as it's got more lucrative, more and more people are talking seriously about AI and AGI and insisting that they're about to create it, whatever it is. So at best, AGI is a marketing term. At worst, I think it's one of the most distracting and dangerous ideas in technology, because there's something fundamentally lazy about the fantasy that if only we can build a perfect machine, we can solve the world's problems. And this is not me using these words. If you read sort of the blog posts of a lot of the heads of these companies, they talk about building AGI because it's going to solve poverty, it's going to solve climate change, it's going to cure disease. But if you really subscribe to that belief system, then you're not going to be interested in the actual hard work, the messy real-world work that you need to solve all those problems, like the global cooperation we'd need to do any of those things. So where does that leave us? We are building machines which are getting better at mimicking some of the things that people can do. But there's also massive flaws in the technology. We don't really understand how it works. And AGI is not around the corner, and probably not around any corners. So here's how I think about AI. I think we've built machines that have a range of human-like behaviors, but we haven't kicked the habit. We can't shrug off the habit of imagining human-like minds behind those behaviors. I mean, we're hardwired to do this. And the problem with that is it completely influences how we respond to this technology. We overestimate how good it is. We see things that aren't really there behind it. And we all need to be aware of these things as it's deployed in the world, as Google and everybody else puts it out of the world. We need to know what it is and how it works. It's totally OK to think AI is amazing. It's totally OK to also be skeptical about everything you hear about it. The one thing I would leave you with is if anybody stands up and tells you what you should think about AI, don't believe them. Thank you.